Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into the soft glow of oil lamps, the scent of spiced wine drifting through the air, and the faint, ever-present threat of tripping over a sleeping mastiff under the banquet table. You're in ancient Rome now, wrapped in linen reclining on your left elbow and about to discover the surprisingly complicated story of forks. The meal in front of you stretches endlessly olives stuffed with herbs. You can't pronounce honey-glazed dormice, yes, actual mice, and suspiciously slippery oysters. There's no such thing as a main course. This is a convivium, a Roman dinner party, which means eating is basically a marathon, and pacing yourself is a matter of survival. You're expected to eat until you groan audibly, then take a short walk in the atrium, then come back and do it again. You reach for a fig with your fingers because what else would you use? Spoons are around, sure, mostly for soup or porridge, and knives exist, but are handled by servants. But for now, your hands are your best tools. You dab at your chin with a square of linen that used to be a napkin, but now feels suspiciously like someone's toga. The social rules are slippery here. Across from you, a senator named Gaius is trying to balance a quail leg in his fingers while giving an impassioned speech about grain tariffs. You nod supportively, mostly because your mouth is full of something that might be eel. You're trying to appear refined. But the truth is, Roman meals aren't very tidy affairs. People recline belch openly and wipe their hands on anything that doesn't move fast enough. There are chamber pots in the corners of the dining room, just in case things get really relaxed. And yet, oddly, it all works. Until it doesn't. Because one day someone brings a fork. It's not the kind of fork you know today, not a polished, four-pronged utensil resting daintily on a folded napkin. No, this thing has two long metal tines, slightly curved, and it looks more like a weapon than a dining aid. You might mistake it for a skewer or a hairpin. You see someone, probably a merchant from the east, using it to spear bits of lamb, and you're intrigued. But then Gaia scoffs and mutters that it's a woman's affectation. So you pretend not to care. You do care, though. The idea of a utensil that keeps your fingers clean. Revolutionary. But in Rome, cleanliness isn't always king. Showing off your greasy hands after a good meal is almost a flex. It says, look at me. I've been well fed, and I'm rich enough not to care. The arrival of the fork doesn't exactly trigger a cutlery revolution. Most people ignore it. Some mock it. A few wealthy eccentrics import them from Byzantium. But the general consensus is why complicate a good thing? Still, you can't help but notice that the fork starts showing up more and more. At the tables of aristocrats. In the hands of rich widows and pampered poets. No one talks about it much, but the utensil is worming its way into Roman life like an overambitious dinner guest who refuses to leave. The funny part, you Romans already have tools for food. There's the ligula, a spoon-like implement that sometimes even has a sharp end for cutting soft foods. And the cochlear, a spoon with a narrow handle used to dig into snails. Yes, snail spoons were a thing. Forks, though. Still a novelty, and frankly, kind of threatening. You lean over to pluck a grape and wonder how many utensils does one civilization really need? Historians still argue whether the earliest Roman forks were imported luxuries or native innovations that just didn't catch on. Some believe they were used only in kitchens to handle hot meat. Others think they were religious tools, reserved for sacrificial rites, meat offered to the gods, skewered just so. Either way, no one's using them to eat salad yet. You recline further into the couch, your belly full and your fingers sticky. You watch a servant carefully balance a silver bowl of garum, the infamous fermented fish sauce, and your stomach flips a little. Not because of the smell, though. Yes, it's an experience. But because someone is using a fork to stir it. Tiny, gleaming elegant. And suddenly that feels important. You try to shake it off. You've seen stranger things at Roman dinners, dwarfs writing pigs poets, reciting odes to asparagus, even a man who tried to patent a new kind of olive. But the fork, it's different. It's not a performance. It's a quiet revolution. One slender prong at a time. And as the torches dim and the guests drift into post-feast comas, you glance at the table and spot it again, that alien thing gleaming among the crumbs and goblets. You wonder if someday it'll be the only thing people use to eat. For now, though, you still use your fingers, because you're Roman, and Romans do things the Roman way, even if that means licking your hand in public. You wake up groggy, still half reclined on a cushion that smells faintly of spiced wine garum and regret. There's a piece of fig stuck to your tunic and someone's sandal under your head. The dinner party is long over, the torches have burned down to embers, and the only thing stirring is a cat, nibbling on what may or may not have once been a roasted dormouse. You sit up slowly. Your stomach aches slightly, partly from overeating, partly from the sheer labor of digestion without utensils. You glance toward the low table where a few forgotten dishes remain. And there it is again, the fork. It's a small one this time. Delicate. Two long golden tines curved just enough to seem elegant rather than menacing. It glints in the early dawn light slipping through the columns of the atrium. You pick it up and turn it in your hand almost like a puzzle. You still mostly eat with your fingers. Everyone does. Spoons are handy, yes, especially when the stew gets too runny. Knives rarely used by guests. A servant will carve meat and serve it to you already portioned, and you just grab it from there. Maybe you use a little bit of bread to mop things up. The Romans love bread. But this fork, it makes you pause. It hasn't taken over your life yet, but you're noticing it more. It slips into conversations usually followed by laughter or mockery. It gets passed around like a curiosity at high society dinners. Once you even saw a senator use it to eat grapes, which felt deeply unnecessary but oddly dignified. It's strange because this isn't the first time the world has seen a fork. You remember hearing about the Persians using similar tools centuries ago. In Persia, forks were used more for food preparation, holding meat steady while it was carved. Same in Egypt. It's a practical tool, not a fancy one. And yet in Rome, where practicality is often the excuse for decadence, forks are treated like exotic contraband. Historians still argue whether the fork's entry into Roman dining was gradual or explosive. Some claim it showed up in kitchens first as a tool for chefs and slaves to maneuver hot meats and slippery vegetables without searing their hands. Others think it entered through trade with the East, a product tucked inside crates of silk and incense, unassuming but destined to stir up more than a stew. One theory even suggests that the fork was introduced not by merchants but by entertainers, foreign performers, brought to Roman courts for their novelty. They would showcase strange customs, including eating with shiny two-pronged devices, just to shock and amuse the aristocracy. You chuckle at the idea. You've seen stranger things at parties, a goose in shoes, a man juggling fig cakes, even a woman who ate only by sniffing bread and absorbing the nutrients through air. She died, of course. But back to forks. You examine the tines again. Two-pronged straight efficient. Not ideal for twirling anything but perfect for spearing. Meat olives, bits of fruit. You imagine eating a snail with it. Oh wait, that's what the cochlear spoon is for. You keep forgetting Romans already have a utensil for that. There's a subtle tension rising now in Roman dining culture. You feel it at banquets where some guests are quietly adopting new habits, using forks in corners of the room under their cloaks of manners. It's like watching a secret society form around a table setting. And with that shift, opinions begin to divide. The old guard insists the fork is unnecessary. They argue that Roman fingers are perfectly suited for eating, thank you very much. There's even talk that using a fork is unmanly, weak, prissy, unpatriotic. If the gods had wanted Romans to use forks, they wouldn't have given them thumbs. On the other side, the early adopters are quietly pushing forward. They speak of cleanliness, of refinement, of not smearing one's tunic with anchovy paste for the fourth time in a row. You nod. It's compelling. But tradition in Rome isn't so easily unseated. There's a strange pride in messiness. A feast is proof of your wealth, your connections, your gluttony, your life. To suggest it needs to be tamed with utensils feels almost sacrilegious. Still, forks start to appear more frequently at elite events. Imported from Byzantium. Handcrafted in silver. Given as novelty gifts or conversation starters. Some are even engraved with the names of their owners as if to say, yes, I fork. And I do it with style. You remember attending a wedding where the bride and groom exchanged forks along with rings. Everyone laughed at first. Then everyone got very quiet. Historians still argue whether that moment marked the fork's official entrance into Roman table culture, or whether it was just another oddity destined to fade like grape-flavored perfume and volcanic foot baths. But you sitting there now, holding that tiny fork, sense that something is changing. Not just in how Romans eat, but in how they present themselves. A utensil isn't just a tool, it's an identity marker. Using a fork says something. It says you've been places. that you know things, that maybe you're better than the man licking honey off his elbow beside you. And even if you're not, at least your sleeves are cleaner. You stretch your legs as you stroll through the Forum the next day, weaving between marble columns, olive vendors, and political ranting so loud they might qualify as public theater. Rome is loud. Rome is messy. Rome is, as always, vibrating with the tension between the old and the new. And right now, you're thinking about forks. Specifically about how the Romans, your people, borrow almost everything from the Greeks, but somehow draw the line at cutlery. You've already got Greek gods with Roman names. Greek architecture with a bit of added concrete flair. Greek philosophers, Greek drama. Greek wine, just admit it. But when it comes to table utensils, something about adopting a Greek idea feel too intimate, too personal, too much. Because make no mistake, forks are Greek. Or at least they start in the Hellenistic world. Their refined diners use two-pronged tools to serve food. It's elegant. It's civilized. It's a way to avoid looking like you just dug into your meal like a goat. The Greeks treat meals like performances. They sit upright, use small bites, and talk about Plato between courses. You, on the other hand, recline on a couch and let your toga do most of the absorbing. Still, you can't help but notice that Greek households, especially the richer ones, do make occasional use of small forks for sticky foods like dried fruits or candied nuts. They're not widespread, but they're there. A glimmer of future table etiquette. And of course, your Roman pride kicks in. You remind yourself that the Greeks are dramatic, fussy, overly intellectual. That's what the poets say anyway. Still, it's hard not to admire their attention to detail. You've been to Athens, you've seen the forks, you've used one. It was kind of nice. Historians still argue whether the Greeks invented forks as we think of them today, or if those utensils were more decorative than functional, more gesture than necessity. But clearly something fork-like was bubbling in the Eastern Mediterranean. Which brings us to you in Rome, watching a Greek merchant delicately pluck a fig from a tray, using a small two-pronged utensil, while you suck honey off your thumb and pretend it's fine. He doesn't gloat, of course. He doesn't have to. His clean fingers say everything. Back home, you bring it up casually over dinner. Just a comment about those strange Greek tines. Your cousin snorts. Your uncle waves a greasy chicken wing in protest. Forks are for cowards, someone declares. Fingers build character. That night, a man with too much wine in his system stabs an olive with a toothpick and shouts, "Look, I invented the mini fork." The table erupts in laughter. You smile politely, but in your heart, you're already Googling Byzantine importers. Or you would be if Rome had Wi-Fi. A week later, you attend a diplomatic banquet. Among the guests, scholars, statesmen, and a few high society Greeks. The menu is outrageous roasted pheasant truffle-laced mushrooms, little cakes shaped like miniature temples. And at one end of the table, someone's using a fork. You catch yourself staring. Two tines polished, curved, elegant. It's almost hypnotic, like a magician's wand for food. The man using it doesn't even glance around. He doesn't care if people think it's weird. He just calmly spears a cube of spiced melon, raises an eyebrow, and slides it into his mouth without smearing so much as a speck of sauce on his toga. It's kind of beautiful. That night, you wonder, is this how new customs begin? Not with fanfare, but with subtle performances. A man, a melon, and a fork. Historians still argue whether Roman resistance to the fork was primarily cultural or theological. Some believe it stemmed from masculine pride. Forks were seen as soft, fussy, even decadent. Others suggest it was tied to deeper fears of Eastern influence, a worry that adopting too many foreign practices would weaken Rome's core identity. You personally think it's mostly ego. Because once the fork enters the room, it forces everyone to ask, why haven't we done this sooner? And with that question comes discomfort. Change, after all, isn't really about the thing itself, it's about what the thing says about you. Using a fork says you want to eat cleaner, more efficiently, more elegantly, but it also says you want to change something about Rome, and in this city that is always controversial. Even so, the utensil spreads slowly, first to the homes of eccentric senators, then to wealthy women who appreciate clean fingers and clean reputations. then to artists and scholars always eager to adopt foreign curiosities. Before long, it becomes a symbol not just of good taste, but of being well-traveled, cosmopolitan, enlightened. But the backlash is real. You hear rumors that a philosopher named Publius called the fork an affront to divine design, arguing that nature gave you fingers because that's what the gods intended. Others say forks separate humans from their food in an unnatural way. That to touch your food is to know it, that the fork is a barrier. Cold, sterile, anti-human. You don't say it out loud, but part of you agrees. There is something satisfying about eating with your hands. It's primal. It's messy. It connects you to the food in a way no metal tool ever could. But still, you think of the Greek at the banquet, the precision, the cleanliness, the grace, and you can't help but wonder if one day eating without a fork will feel as primitive as rubbing sticks together for fire. By the time you're invited to your next banquet, you already know what to expect: couches arranged in a loose U shape the host, lounging at the center like a smug octopus, and a dizzying sequence of dishes that would make even a seasoned glutton question their life choices. You brace yourself. Tonight's meal is rumored to be a triclinium maximus, a massive over-the-top feast with more courses than you have patience for. 15, possibly 20, each more bizarre than the last. Pickled sea urchin check, flaming peacock tongue. Absolutely. Jellyfish terrine molded into the shape of a senator's bust. Naturally. As you recline into your assigned corner, already loosening your belt for what's ahead, something catches your eye. Not the food. Not even the flaming amphora centerpiece. It's what people are using to eat. Hands, of course, sticky, dexterous, efficient. Spoons. A few ornate knives for show. But in the far corner, a guest you don't recognize is holding a fork. And not just any fork. This one is made of bronze with a spiral handle and a bird carved into the hilt. It has 2 tines narrow and curved like a crescent moon. It's beautiful. You lean in for a better look, trying not to stare like a country bumpkin at a chariot race. The guest notices and, without breaking eye contact, plucks a fig from the platter with the fork and raises it in a silent toast. Show off! But you can't deny the appeal, because let's face it, Roman dining is a mess. There are no personal plates. Food is served communally, often on oversized trays you reach toward like a child stealing fruit from a market stall. Sauces drip, fingers plunge, and everyone just kind of hopes for the best. By the end of the first hour, your hands are covered in oil honey and something suspiciously green. You reach for a napkin but realize it's already being used as a wine blotter by the man beside you. This is how hygiene dies. You glance at the fork again. Historians still argue whether Roman feasts were always this chaotic, or if the lavishness of the late empire exaggerated things. What is clear is that by now meals aren't just about food, they're performances. And in performances, props matter. You watch as a servant brings in a new course, roasted game birds glazed in fig sauce garnished with candied rose petals. It's a delicate dish, one that screams for precision. You try to tear into it with your fingers, but the skin slides the bone's crunch, and the sauce ends up on your sleeve. Meanwhile, Fork Guy glides through the course like a well-oiled mechanism of grace and smugness. Not a stain, not a smear. Just effortless elegance. And that's when it hits you. This isn't just about utility anymore. It's about image. A fork doesn't just help you eat, it helps you look good while eating. And in a culture obsessed with appearances that's revolutionary, still, most Romans remain stubborn. Even the ones who like the fork don't want to admit it. So they hide their forks in folds of fabric, use them only for the trickiest dishes, or pretend they're just kitchen tools accidentally brought to the table. Your aunt, for example, insists on eating everything with her fingers, including soup. She claims forks are for Persians and poets. Yet somehow she always ends dinner without a single drop of sauce on her gown. Suspicious. Your neighbor's son brings a fork to dinner one night and is promptly mocked for 10 minutes straight. He responds by balancing an entire meatball on its prongs and flinging it across the room into someone's goblet. Everyone cheers. Crisis averted, but the anxiety remains. The problem with Roman dining isn't just the mess, it's the ritual. Every motion is steeped in tradition. How you recline, who you face, what you say when toasting. Introducing a new utensil, That's not just innovation, that's heresy. You think back to the early days when you first attended elite dinners. You were told not to speak while chewing, not to reach too far, not to eat faster than the host. One guest was expelled mid-meal for gas burping, without apologizing to the household gods. He claimed he was just honoring Bacchus. Now you wonder if one day forks will be part of those rituals. If a future host will glare at a guest and say, "Hold the fork by the handle, not the tines, you absolute barbarian." It's coming, you can feel it. And yet at tonight's feast, most people still opt for hands. Spoons get some love. Knives flash, occasionally slicing into soft cheeses or loaves of crusty bread. But forks, just a whisper, a preview, an artifact of a future not quite here. Still, their presence is increasing. You spot a merchant's wife using one to serve pickled onions, a young poet discreetly picking at olives, a politician quietly turning his fork over and over in his hand like he's pondering a piece of divine prophecy. Historians still argue whether the fork's popularity grew from practicality or pressure. Some say it offered a solution to the greasy, chaotic nature of multi-course Roman dining. Others claim it was pure theater a way for wealthy citizens to differentiate themselves. To say I don't just eat, I curate my consumption. You settle deeper into your cushion, now fully resigned to the wine stain on your leg. Across the room, someone drops a bowl of sauce and curses in Greek. A slave slips a dog, steals a sausage, and someone bursts into drunken song. Classic Roman night. But you're still thinking about that fork. Not because it's useful, not because it's elegant, but because somehow it feels like a tiny rebellion. A quiet way to say, we could do this differently. And in a society that clings so fiercely to tradition, that's the boldest move of all. The next day, you find yourself in the market, aimlessly wandering past stalls selling figs, dates, and enough fish to make Neptune himself gag. There's a man yelling about cured meat, a woman cursing at a goat, and a street performer balancing a pineapple on his head while reciting Virgil. Rome never disappoints. You duck into a side alley where the real treasures are antique trinkets, imported oddities, and things that may or may not be cursed. One merchant calls out to you. He's old, smells like garlic and ambition, and he's grinning like he knows something you don't. Looking for something exotic, he asks, lifting a silk cloth to reveal a fork. 2 tines. Silver. Byzantine styling. It's delicate and deliberate, like it was designed by someone who thinks knives are too aggressive and spoons too lazy. You hold it in your hand. It's surprisingly heavy. Balanced. More tool than toy. Came from the East, the man says, leaning in. Constantinople, the Empress's own design. He's lying, obviously, but it's a good lie. You buy it anyway. Because here's the truth while Rome hesitates. The Eastern Empire, the Byzantines, are already embracing the fork, like it's the culinary second coming. In Constantinople, forks are not just tools, they're symbols of refinement. Dinner there is a quieter, more orderly affair with small bites and minimal face wiping. You admire that. A lot. The fork you just bought. It's probably meant for pastries or fruit, but you're going to try it on everything. Meat, cheese, that weird jelly thing your neighbor's wife insists on bringing to every festival. Let's see if it can survive Roman cuisine. Historians still argue whether the fork traveled from east to west via merchants or marriages, but there's no question that Byzantium plays a major role in keeping the utensil alive. Where Rome scoffs, Constantinople celebrates. And it's in that glittering city, half Greek, half Roman, entirely dramatic, that forks begin to flourish. You hear stories, dinner parties, where forks are expected, not optional. Emperors who refuse to eat without them. Aristocrats who commission custom sets with enamel inlays and little gemstones in the handle. Forks aren't just cutlery, they're status, identity. A silent way of saying I'm not a barbarian. Back in Rome, of course, this is all scandalous. Forks. At every meal. The thought alone would send your uncle into a stroke. People mutter that Byzantines have gone soft, that they're too Persian, too feminine, too detached from the good old days of grabbing a mutton leg and gnawing on it like a gladiator. But deep down, there's curiosity. You know this because when you show your new fork at a small dinner with friends, the room goes quiet. Someone gasps, someone else scoffs and loudly proclaims, "That thing looks like Poseidon's hairpin." But then the host leans over and says, May I try it? And just like that, your fork makes the rounds. No one says much, but you see it in their eyes, the gears are turning. The next day, your cousin borrows it. Just for olives, she says. Sure. A week later, she has 4 forks. All silver. All imported. All for olives. A month later, your neighbor hosts a feast, and guess what's sitting next to the wine goblets? A row of neatly placed matching forks. No one mentions them. They're just there now. Like they've always been there. Change you realize is sneaky, and sometimes it smells like fig glaze. But Rome doesn't like to change all at once. The old families hold out. The priests remain skeptical. The military scoffs. You hear whispers from the forum that some see forks as immoral. That separating yourself from your food with metal is unnatural. That it's anti-Roman. There's even a phrase being thrown around, diabolica forcula, the devil's fork. Ridiculous, sure. But this is a city where people still believe in omens from bird entrails. Historians still argue whether the early church's discomfort with the fork began in Rome or developed later in medieval Europe. But the seeds are definitely here. Anything new, anything foreign gets a layer of suspicion. You attend a small gathering at a noble's villa one evening. Intimate, refined, just 6 guests and 35 courses. And you notice something interesting. Each place is set with a fork, not loudly, not proudly, but there. Subtle. Like a whisper of revolution under a silk napkin. No one comments, but no one ignores it either. As the meal progresses, you see more and more forks being used. For fruit. For fish. Even for slicing into a strange pudding that collapses like a flan having an existential crisis. And no one fumbles. No one drops it. It feels natural. Almost too natural. You sit back, sated and smug, watching a senator spear a cherry with the grace of a man who's clearly practiced in secret. You think to yourself, Rome may resist, but Rome also absorbs. It always has. Always will. Give it time. The fork will win. Not because it's better, though, let's face it, it is. But because it feels better. Cleaner, calmer, quieter. And in a city that's constantly shouting, sometimes a little quiet goes a long way. You tuck your fork into your tunic and head home full of food wine and the giddy thrill of low-stakes rebellion. You wake up late the next morning, throat-dry stomach groaning and fingers still faintly sticky from candied pine nuts. As you sit up, your first thought isn't about the wine or even the embarrassment of dropping your olive into the senator's sandal last night. It's your fork. You take it out, brush a few breadcrumbs off the handle, and turn it over in your hand. The novelty's worn off. What's left is a quiet satisfaction. This isn't just a tool anymore, it's your dining identity. You're a fork person now. There's no going back. Not everyone agrees, of course. You wander down the road toward the Temple District, passing bakeries and shouting butchers, and that one man who always seems to be selling eels out of a cart that smells like regret. On the marble steps of a small shrine, a young preacher is gathering a crowd. He's not just ranting about sin and vice, he's holding up a fork. He waves it in the air like a weapon or maybe a cursed artifact. Tools of arrogance, he shouts. Instruments of vanity. The diabolica forcula divides man from his food, just as pride divides man from the gods. You blink. Is he talking about your fork? Yes, he is. Turns out some early Christian thinkers and a growing group of moralists are not fans of this pronged invasion. They argue that eating is meant to be humble, intimate, a bodily act of gratitude and humility. The fork, they say, creates distance. It sterilizes the experience. It removes the mess that proves we're human. One bishop even calls it blasphemous engineering. You want to argue, but you also remember last night watching a priest eat honeyed dates with his bare fingers and then wipe them on a holy scroll. So, maybe not the strongest position to take. Historians still argue whether anti-fork sentiment was truly religious in origin, or just a cultural panic, given holy flavoring. Some claim early Christian writings didn't mention utensils at all because they had more pressing concerns like persecution and actual martyrdom. Others believe the fork became a symbol of Eastern decadence, which in turn got wrapped up in theology by association. And Byzantium. Oh, they don't care. In Constantinople, they're too busy using forks to arrange little towers of cheese and pickled fruit. The Byzantine elite adopt forks as part of their ritual. Their faith doesn't reject refinement, it embraces beauty and symbolism. So, while Rome cringes, the East prongs ahead. But now you're seeing the backlash grow. At dinner parties, forks are whispered about. Not just as odd, but inappropriate. One noblewoman loudly declares she refuses to dine with those who stab their meals like traitors. It gets a laugh. But you notice her husband secretly pocketing a tiny fork from the platter of quince. You attend a wedding and overhear a whispered argument in the atrium the bride wants forks served with the fish course. The groom's mother threatens to cancel the ceremony. No daughter-in-law of mine is going to eat trout like a foreign seductress. The tension is real. Still, forks persist, especially among women. The elite, the educated, the ones hosting salons where poetry is read over dates, and wine not vomited back up in alleyways. For them, the fork is power. It allows delicacy. It maintains dignity. No more clawing at pheasant bones like you're reenacting the sack of Gaul. You're invited to one such salon. It's quiet, controlled. Musicians in the corner, soft conversation, the scent of myrrh in the air. You feel oddly clean just being there. And at each place, setting a fork. 2 tines. Silver, inlaid with mother of pearl. You watch the hostess slice a fig with a knife, then gently lift it to her mouth with the fork. No sauce. No mess. She doesn't even blink. It's hypnotic. You take your own fork in hand. Spear a bit of goat cheese. And just like that, you forget all the sweaty arguments, the dogmatic shouting, the threats of divine wrath. This feels right. It's not about rebellion anymore. It's not about Byzantium or pride or distance from the gods. It's just dinner. Clean, calm, controlled. Historians still debate whether the moral objections to forks ever truly slowed their spread, or if they were just the last desperate gasps of a culture clinging to finger food. What's clear is that once the fork caught on with women, especially those in high social circles, its journey was all but secured. Because in Rome, women don't wield political power, but social power. That's a different game. They set the tone of the table. They host the gatherings. They decide what is in and what is vulgar. And when the noble women start gifting forks as wedding presents, it's over. You find this out firsthand when your cousin gets engaged. She doesn't want jewels or land. She wants forks. I want 12, she says firmly. 1 for every dish. You raise your eyebrows. Even soup. She smirks, especially soup. It's a joke, but not really. You realize then the fork is no longer a curiosity. It's a movement. And though the preachers rage and the uncles groan and the old senators scoff into their lentils, change is here, and it's got 2 tines. You're beginning to notice a pattern. At every dinner you attend, whether it's a lavish senatorial feast or a cozy gathering under the pergola with neighbors, and one suspiciously tipsy chicken, the fork is there. Sometimes proudly displayed beside the spoons and knives. Sometimes tucked quietly beside the bread like an afterthought no one dares acknowledge. But it's there. Always. The most interesting part? It's not the object itself, it's the people using it. You start recognizing them. The fork crowd. Artists. Daughters of generals. Tutors with soft voices and sharper opinions. Even a few brave politicians with a penchant for Eastern silks and subtle defiance. They don't all know each other, but they move the same way, quiet, deliberate, purposeful. They handle their forks with a kind of gentle rebellion, like they're taming the chaos of Rome one bite at a time. And then there are the others. The stubborn traditionalists. The ones still double-fisting dates and wiping garum from their beards with their sleeves. You sit between both camps watching like a spy with sauce on your cuff. One night, you're invited to a private symposium hosted by a well-known historian. He serves 9 courses. By course 5, you've been asked to comment on everything from Catullus's use of metaphor to whether olive oil is a form of social currency. You try to sound clever, but mostly you nod and chew. That is, until the fish course. The dish arrives a delicate whole, trout deboned, lightly grilled, and draped in a wine reduction. It's served with a citrus compote so fragrant you consider writing a poem about it. Everyone waits. You know why. Because the host, a very smug-looking man in a woolen toga, 2 shades too bright, has laid out a full place-setting knife, spoon, and fork. It's a test. You reach for your fork. So does everyone else. And suddenly you realize this isn't about foreign influence anymore. It's not about Byzantium, or religion, or gender roles. This is about manners. Forks are no longer scandalous, they're expected. Not in every household, no. The common tavern still serves stew in wooden bowls, and fingers remain the primary tool of the masses. But in Rome's upper circles, a shift has happened. You don't remember the moment. No one does. But now a forkless dinner feels incomplete. Historians still argue whether this wave of etiquette was sparked by the fork, or if the fork simply benefited from it. One theory suggests that Rome was already on the verge of a social dining revolution. More formality, more structure, and the fork just slipped in at the right time like an uninvited but charming guest. You're inclined to agree, because now people aren't just using forks, they're talking about them. There's debate over how to hold one properly. Tines up or tines down? In the right hand or the left, should the fork be used to cut or only to lift? One senator insists that twirling noodles around a fork is barbaric, while his nephew does it proudly and calls it modern elegance. You witness an argument between two matrons over whether it's vulgar to lick your fork between bites. One declares that licking implies savagery. The other says it implies satisfaction. You sip your wine and pretend to agree with both. And then there's the latest horror, double forking. You attend a dinner where the host presents not one, but two forks at each setting. One for savory, one for sweet. The guests nearly faint. A man drops his wine in shock. The hostess smiles like she's just introduced indoor plumbing. You try it. It feels powerful. And with great power comes great dinner anxiety. People begin practicing at home. You walk past windows and see silhouettes moving through imaginary courses, carefully adjusting grip and posture. You overhear someone muttering left for olives, right for pears, like a sacred mantra. One of your friends even hires a tutor. Yes, a fork tutor to improve her form before an important engagement dinner. Because now your fork technique says more than your toga ever could. You receive an invitation next week with a footnote. Please observe correct utensil etiquette. Forks will be provided. You chuckle, then panic. You spend the next 2 days eating everything with a fork. Grapes, cheese, boiled eggs, even soup. You try. It goes badly. Your dog looks confused. You press on. By the time the banquet arrives, you're ready. You sit confidently. You grip your fork with just enough delicacy to suggest breeding, but enough firmness to say, yes, I can handle quail. The first course arrives. You nail it. The second, clean bites. Third, no spills. Fourth, subtle twirl and lift. You're soaring. By dessert, you're basically conducting a symphony. And the best part, no one notices. Because now everyone is doing it. Historians still argue whether this was the moment Rome tipped into full fork adoption, or if it was simply a regional trend among the elite. But for you, it's clear the fork is no longer the guest, it's the host. And oddly enough, things are a little quieter. There's less slurping, less wiping, fewer food fights. Conversations flow more smoothly when no one's wrestling with a lamb shank in one hand and gesturing wildly with the other. You lean back after the meal full and content your fork resting on the plate like an exclamation point to a well-constructed sentence. And you realize deep down that something subtle and permanent has changed. Rome didn't fall to forks. It folded them into its identity. As it always does. You don't realize it at first, but the fork has officially infiltrated Roman politics. It begins as these things do with a wedding. A very public wedding. A Byzantine princess, graceful, radiant. A known collector of exotic perfumes and rare gemstones is marrying a powerful Venetian noble. The marriage is a power move, a diplomatic alliance, a whispered betrothal between empires. But you're not really interested in the politics. You're interested in the fact that she brings forks. Dozens of them. Golden ones. Ivory-handled ones. Forks engraved with prayers. Forks shaped like swans. Forks with fork-sized cases lined in velvet. Her dowry apparently includes a full silver table set for 100 guests each, complete with a matching two-tined fork. Rome watches. And Rome gossips. You attend a small gathering the evening of the wedding. Everyone's pretending not to talk about it, but of course that's all anyone is doing. Someone mentions that she used a fork to eat cake. Cake of all things. Another swears she used one to slice grapes. Your neighbor's uncle leans in conspiratorially and whispers, "She refused to touch food with her fingers. Said it was unclean." Gasps all around. You sip your wine and grin. The woman just declared war on Roman custom and somehow made it look regal. Historians still argue whether this event, the marriage between Maria Argyropulina and the Doge's son, was truly the fork's big European breakout or just an amusing footnote. What's undeniable is that it causes a stir. Some call her a hero of refinement. Others whisper she's an agent of decadence, proof that the East has grown soft and unserious. The church naturally weighs in. One bishop famously declares that God would not have given us fingers if he had intended us to eat with metal. Others go even further, suggesting the fork is not just unnatural, it's arrogant, prideful, a rejection of divine design. You're amazed at how seriously people take it. It's a tiny piece of metal, 2 prongs, and yet it's being called sinful, feminine, elitist, even blasphemous. All because a princess didn't want to get fig syrup on her fingertips. At the same time, Rome is buzzing. The aristocrats are curious. The merchants are intrigued. The blacksmiths, they're thrilled. Orders for custom forks surge. You walk by a smithy and see a display case of new designs forks with leaf-shaped handles, tridents, even one modeled after Jupiter's lightning bolt, which feels a bit aggressive for a salad course. Suddenly everyone wants to try it. But not everyone wants to admit it. The next banquet you attend is hosted by a senator who swore just a year ago that he'd rather eat porridge with a dagger than use one of those Eastern devil fangs. And yet, here he is now placing forks beside every dish like they've always belonged there. He doesn't comment. No one does. But the message is clear. We're doing this now. Of course, the implementation is messy. At one dinner, a guest uses their fork backward. Another tries to cut a honey cake with it and ends up flinging pieces across the room. One very drunk official spears an entire loaf of bread and waves it around like he's conducting the imperial orchestra. But people learn quickly, and with adoption comes standardization. You see guides appear, yes, actual dining guides. Little scrolls passed around social circles with tips on proper fork usage. Hold it gently. Don't use it like a weapon. Don't lick it unless absolutely necessary, which, according to some, is never. Don't stab your neighbor's fingers when reaching for olives. That last one, added after an unfortunate incident involving a very territorial magistrate. You even hear rumors that the fork is being written into the curriculum for noble children. Table etiquette is now a legitimate lesson. One boy brags that he can identify 8 different fork types by sound alone. You're skeptical, but impressed. Historians still debate whether this rapid normalization was unique to Rome, or if the entire Mediterranean world was undergoing a similar transformation. But you in the thick of it can feel the tide turning, and yet not everyone is ready. You attend a funeral feast? Yes, those are a thing, and someone dares to serve food with forks. Half the room refuses to eat. One old woman crosses herself and mutters a prayer. The priest loudly eats with his hands, declaring it the godliest bite of goose I've ever had. But the younger guests, they dig in with forks. No fuss, no shame. And just like that, a new generation takes the reins. It's subtle, it's slow, but it's happening, one prong at a time. You stroll through the forum the next day and hear a vendor hawking table sets fit for an empress forks. Included, a child walks by pretending his fork is a sword. A painter sketches a dinner scene, and you notice there it is nestled among the goblets. And bread, a fork unremarked upon. You can't remember the last time someone mocked it. And in that quiet shift, you see the truth. Rome didn't reject the fork. It wrestled with it, mocked it, feared it, and then made it its own. Just like it did with everything else. It sneaks up on you. One day, you're scolded for bringing a fork to a temple picnic. The next, you're being judged for not using one at a senator's brunch. Suddenly, there are rules, more rules than you ever imagined possible for how to use this deceptively simple utensil. You're not just expected to bring a fork. You're expected to know what to do with it. Where to place it between bites. How to balance it. When to set it down. Whether to let it touch your tongue or gently deposit the food like it's a sacred offering. Who knew that holding a tiny metal stick could come with more anxiety than public speaking in front of Cicero? You attend a dinner party where the host hands you a folded parchment. You assume it's a seating chart. It's not. It's an instructional guide. Fork etiquette, a guest's responsibilities. You read the first few lines aloud and instantly regret it. Teens must not be pointed upward unless addressing fish, or unless the moon is waxing. Is this a joke? It's not. The host has a fork trainer. A person. Paid. To help guests fork correctly. You watch him make rounds like a wine steward, gently adjusting grip. Correcting posture, whispering, No, no, don't saw with it. You try to be subtle. You fail. It's overwhelming. But you're not alone. All of Rome's elite seem to be faking it until they make it. The fork has triggered an avalanche of social pressure. You remember when you could show up slather garum on everything and chew like a lion in mid-victory? Now you have to compose your bites like a sculptor arranging marble shavings. Historians still argue whether this wave of dining discipline was a natural outgrowth of urban refinement or an artificial trend imposed by the aristocracy to further distinguish themselves from the masses. Either way, you're feeling the squeeze. And so Roman society does what it always does when unsure of itself, it codifies. Suddenly there are schools of etiquette. You hear about one in the Aventine district where children practice formal dining every morning using little wooden forks. There's another in Ostia offering weekend retreats with classes like Tines and Their Times, and the posture of power reposing with confidence. You hear whispers of a nobleman's daughter who was passed over for marriage because she gripped her fork like a chisel. Brutal, but it's not all stress. There's a new elegance now. Meals are quieter, more rhythmic. You notice it at a birthday banquet, the soft clink of forks, the hush between courses, the way conversation flows without interruption from someone ripping apart a roast pheasant with bare hands. Your friend, a senator's wife with impeccable taste and a slightly terrifying dog, invites you for lunch and serves grilled peaches on chilled plates. You reach instinctively for your fork. She nods with approval. That small gesture. It feels like a promotion. You realize that table manners are now currency. You're seated closer to the host if you fork gracefully. You're invited to more intimate gatherings if you know when to switch hands between bites. You're trusted, respected, even admired, based on how elegantly you spear a fig. Rome has transformed from a city of feasting beasts to a city of fork-wielding diplomats. And with that shift comes a strange kind of paranoia. You overhear two men at the baths discussing another's dining habits. He gripped it like a gladiator. Honestly, I couldn't even finish my quail. You stifle a laugh, and then realize you've said the same thing. Because you've changed too. Historians still debate whether this was an era of social refinement or of manufactured snobbery. Did forks make Rome more civilized or just more judgmental? You suspect both. The transformation has reached the art world as well. You visit a gallery and see frescoes featuring scenes of divine banquets, gods reclining with goblets, ambrosia, and now forks. Someone has retroactively forked Olympus. Jupiter is holding one like a scepter. Venus lifts a strawberry with hers. Mars has a fork strapped to his belt like a weapon. You're not sure if it's satire or propaganda. Either way, it's working. Children now reenact mock banquets at school with toy forks. A new board game emerges, Feast or Faux Pas, where players gain points for navigating social minefields without misusing their utensils. One round involves balancing grapes on a spoon while holding a fork in perfect alignment. You lose immediately. You also hear talk of a musical. Yes, a musical. It's called The Prong of Destiny. The lead character is a blacksmith's son who invents the three-pronged fork and challenges a corrupt senator to a dining duel. It ends with a slow-motion solo where he stabs a dumpling to thunderous applause. It's awful. You see it twice, and as ridiculous as it all sounds, you start to feel a strange affection for it. The absurdity, the drama, the fact that something as simple as a fork has upended your culture and quietly rearranged your entire understanding of dinner. And in this chaos, one fact emerges clearly. Rome has not just accepted the fork, it has ritualized it. The utensil that once drew gasps is now the symbol of self-mastery. It's the conductor's baton of the elite. An unspoken language spoken through wrist angles and bite proportions. And as you sit at a twilight feast fork in hand posture, perfect conversation flowing like warm olive oil, you feel it deep in your chest. You've arrived. You're at a feast in the hills outside Rome. The kind where the wine flows faster than the conversation, and the only thing louder than the musicians is the sound of peacocks screaming in the courtyard for absolutely no reason. And yet, the first thing you notice when you take your seat isn't the roasted boar or the mountain of honeycakes, it's the fork. But not just a fork, a gold fork, with a carved detailing a mother-of-pearl handle, and because apparently reality has lost all grip, a miniature ruby in the base of the handle. The woman next to you sees your expression and smiles proudly. It's Etruscan revival, she says, as if that explains anything. And that's when it hits you. This isn't about eating anymore. This is about display. Once upon a time, forks were tools. Then they were scandal. Then manners. Now, they're fashion. You lean back and take it all in. At the far end of the table, one guest is using a fork shaped like a hippocampus. Another's is enameled in black, with a miniature carving of a gladiator in mid-thrust on the handle. One man has two forks crossed like swords, just waiting to be admired. No one is even eating yet. They're just posing. You wonder if anyone remembers what olives taste like. Historians still argue whether this phase marked the peak of Roman utensil vanity, or if it was just another blip in the endless cycle of luxury trends. But here at this moment, you know exactly what's going on. Forks have become the new rings, the new sandals, the new status marker for those who want to be seen as cultured without having to say a word. You hear one man brag that his fork was blessed by an oracle. Another claims his was dipped in the Tiber at sunrise on the solstice. You resist the urge to ask if it came with a certificate. The trend spreads fast. Soon you can't attend a single event without seeing a new wave of custom forks. There are forks made from coral. Forks with interchangeable tines. Forks that fold. Forks that glow in the dark, allegedly blessed with lunar ash, definitely just radium. One woman is spotted at a poetry salon using a fork carved entirely from crystal. She drops it on the floor and gasps like she's just murdered her soul. You even hear whispers of fork duels, two men in the Subura who argued over whose utensil was more authentic, then challenged each other to a public spearing of roasted chestnuts. No one won. Someone got poked in the eyebrow. A musician composed a song about it. Everyone moved on. And then there's the merchants. They're thriving. You walk through the forum and pass entire stalls dedicated to bespoke tines. You see signs offering fork polishing services. One blacksmith has a banner that reads, "Forceful forks for fierce feasters." You tip your hat out of sheer admiration. Even politicians get involved. You attend a public hearing where a senator, yes, an actual senator, brandishes a golden fork as he speaks about trade reform. He claims the Eastern roots must be protected so that our sacred Roman tables may never be without their most dignified tool. People cheer. You sigh. And then, of course, the inevitable happens: fork envy. One guest won't sit beside another because her fork is less brilliant. A poet refuses to read unless served with his family's ancestral heirloom fork, which is rumored to have once touched the tongue of Julius Caesar. It absolutely did not. A man is exiled from his social circle for showing up with an iron fork. Iron, someone gasped, like he brought an unsharpened stick. You see the madness reaching its peak at a garden banquet thrown by a retired general. The theme, the forks of empire. There are carved ice sculptures of utensils, fork-shaped pastries, dancers holding oversized mock forks as they twirl through clouds of rose petals. And at the center of it all, a display case. Inside the emperor's fork, 4 tines, solid silver, embedded garnets, and a handle sculpted to resemble Rome's 7 hills. It's not clear whether any emperor has actually touched it, but that doesn't stop the crowd from gawking. You lean toward a friend and mutter, "I give it 2 months before someone puts a fork on a coin." You're wrong. It takes one. The denarius forculi, a limited minting to commemorate culinary advancement and imperial refinement. You nearly choke on a grape when you see one, and yet for all the absurdity, there's something undeniably human about it. You see a piece of metal evolve from tool to taboo to symbol of taste all within your lifetime. You're living in an era where how you eat says more than what you eat. Historians still debate whether this burst of fork fashion was a final burst before Roman culture began to collapse under its own excess, or a last gasp of innovation in a world on the brink of change. You suspect both are true, but you've stopped judging. You have your own fork now. Handcrafted, smooth, modest, a quiet kind of beauty. You don't show it off, but you never leave home without it. And at your next dinner party, when someone with an aquamarine-studded trident fork leans over and smirks, you simply smile back. Because you've been here since the beginning. And while they're just discovering the fork, you are the fork. You didn't think it was possible, but now the spoon is fighting back. It starts innocently enough, a casual comment at a midday luncheon. Someone complains that forks are too pointy. Another sighs dramatically and announces, I miss the days when you could eat a grape without performing surgery. You laugh. Everyone laughs. But underneath the laughter, there's a quiet shift happening. Spoons, those rounded, faithful tools that never stabbed, never scratched, never judged, are making a comeback. You don't blame them. Rome has become obsessed with forks. They're everywhere, clinking, glinting, sparkling in torchlight, glittering in gold leaf illustrations. They've become so refined that some people are starting to wonder if they've lost the plot. You go to dinner and spend more time thinking about your utensil than your food. Is that how it's supposed to be? Enter the spoon renaissance. You see it first at an underground poetry reading. A moody young man in a black toga reads from a scroll titled Curved Grace, an Ode to the Humble Spoon. He holds one in his hand while he speaks gently, turning it like a sacred relic. Everyone snaps their fingers. Someone weeps. You pretend to cough, but it's definitely a laugh. Historians still argue whether this anti-fork sentiment was spontaneous or orchestrated by a secret cabal of spoon loyalists. You suspect it was just inevitable. Every trend creates a counter-trend. Forks flew too close to the sun, and now spoons are rising like humble, round-headed phoenixes. The backlash grows. A noblewoman at a tea salon brings only spoons. No forks allowed. We are soft, not savage, she declares, scooping custard with the elegance of a priestess performing a rite. Everyone applauds. You go to a friend's dinner party. The menu, all spoonable foods, lentil stew, honeyed oats, mashed parsnips, chilled melon soup. There's not a single thing you could stab, even if you wanted to. Your fork stays in your tunic, quietly offended. But then something even stranger happens. You begin to see hybrids, spoon-fork combinations, spork-like creations, some with tines so small they look like teeth, others with bowl-shaped heads and thin slicing ridges along the edge. One guest arrives with what can only be described as a spoon spear, and you fear for the cheese platter. Rome, in all its glory and indecisiveness, is now caught in a utensil civil war. You're invited to a banquet with two sides of the room, one entirely fork users, the other spoon advocates. The air is tense. People trade barbed compliments. "Oh, you still use those," someone says, gesturing to the tines across the table. "I admire your commitment to orthopedics." A guest pulls out a tiny shield to protect his soup bowl. You're not sure if it's a joke or a very niche fashion statement. But something deeper is happening here. The fork has become a symbol of control, precision, distance. It elevates the act of eating, but the spoon? The spoon is comfort, warmth, simplicity. It embraces, it holds. It doesn't pierce, it cradles. You go to bed one night thinking about this. You wake up wondering what it all means. At the next gathering, you do something radical. You bring both. You set them side by side. Fork on the left, spoon on the right. One for spearing, one for scooping. You watch the guests' reactions like a hawk. A few raise eyebrows. One woman whispers to her husband. But then the host, an aging senator known for once denouncing forks as Eastern vanity, leans over and says, "Balanced. I like that." Just like that, it spreads. Balanced table settings become the next big thing. Menus evolve. Meals are designed with duality in mind. Dishes that begin solid and end soupy. Appetizers pierced, desserts embraced. A small scroll is passed around listing ideal pairings: duck with fork, creamed date with spoon, candied fig with both fork to slice, spoon to lift. Historians still argue whether this was the point when Roman dining reached its final evolution, or simply entered its most theatrical phase. You suspect the latter, because now every meal is a performance. You watch one nobleman switch utensils mid-bite with the flair of a magician. Someone starts a dining school called Utensilus Maximus. It has a 3-week course on fluid transitions between tools. People audition for seats at banquets. You try not to roll your eyes. You mostly succeed. But privately, you're impressed. Rome has taken 2 simple tools and turned them into an entire language. And in the end, that's what Roman culture always does best. Not just conquer, but absorb. Not just choose, but synthesize. You realize that the fork didn't replace the spoon. It just gave it a rival, a complement. a new partner in this culinary dance. At your next meal, you sit with both in hand. The dish is complex stuffed grape leaves in a saffron broth. You use the fork to cut the spoon to collect the sauce. It's fluid, elegant, natural. You don't even think about it anymore. And that's how you know the war is over. Rome has chosen. It chose everything. You're staring at your fork, not in a philosophical who am I really kind of way. You're just honestly baffled because your fork, the one you've used for years without incident, now has 3 tines. 3. Not 2, not 4. 3. You didn't ask for this. You didn't upgrade it. It simply arrived gifted to you by a friend who said, "It's the new thing. You're welcome." And then vanished before you could ask follow-up questions like, why is it sharp enough to take down a boar? You hold it up to the light. It's longer. Sleeker. The third tine curves slightly inward like it's trying to hug something. You set it beside your old fork, your loyal 2-pronged companion, and suddenly it looks primitive. What happened? Apparently we're adding prongs now. You're not sure when this started. Last month 2 tines were elite. The month before they were scandalous. Now 2 is peasant tier. 3 is in. 4 is rumored. 5 is a myth told only in bathhouse whispers. Historians still argue whether the increase in fork prongs was driven by actual dining needs or pure aesthetic escalation. Some claim it was about grip more tines equals more stability. Others believe it was a design war between blacksmiths, trying to outdo each other in a silent culinary arms race. You believe it's both. Because once something becomes fashionable, it stops obeying logic. You attend a dinner party with your new 3-pronged fork. You try not to feel smug. Across from you, someone has a 4-pronger. You pretend not to notice. It's longer, shinier, vaguely threatening. He uses it to twirl noodles, scoop beans, and at one point, intimidate a piece of lettuce into submission. You hate him a little. And yet, you want one. The next day, you visit your favorite utensil merchant. He has a new section marked Premium Tiny Experiences. You feel a part of yourself die, but you browse anyway. There's a Lusso Maximus line with 4 curved tines and handles made of petrified olive wood. There's even one set with a detachable 5th prong for display purposes only. You ask what could possibly require 5 tines. He replies artichokes. You buy 2, because now it's not about necessity, it's about capability. It's about being ready. What if a rare slippery food item appears and you're under-pronged? What then? You attend another dinner. Everyone's forks are different. Some wide, some narrow. Some so curved they look like tiny hammocks. One guy brought a fork with a hole in the middle. No one knows what it's for, but everyone nods like it's genius. By now, the rules are crumbling. There are courses designed around forks. Tonight's 4th course, the host announces, requires a 3-pronged crescent fork with slight lift on the outer tines. You feel like you're solving a riddle just to eat your fish. And people are talking about it. You hear murmurs of tine fatigue. Someone at the bath says, "I just want to eat soup with a ladle and not be judged." One woman throws a dinner with no utensils allowed and calls it primal dining. It ends with someone slapping a tart across the room in frustration. It's honestly kind of amazing. Historians still debate whether this explosion of fork design signified culinary innovation or just indulgent chaos. You suspect it's both, again, because Rome doesn't just consume, it consumes with style. And then it consumes the style itself. Your own utensil drawer is starting to look like an armory. You have a breakfast fork short-wide ideal for soft cheese. A fruit fork thin narrow disapproves of apples. A banquet fork decorative impossible to wash. A mystery fork unknown function deeply intimidating. You spend more time choosing forks than choosing clothes. At a market, you overhear a merchant yelling, 3 is for elegance, 4 is for ambition, 5 is for domination. You consider asking if he's still talking about forks. You don't, because deep down you agree. But all this innovation creates a new problem for confusion. You go to a banquet and freeze. Which fork do you use for the honeyed eel one has slotted tines? Another is curved like a sickle. You panic and use your fingers. A guest gasps. You knock over your goblet in shame. You start attending utensil identification salons. Yes, that's a thing now. People gather blindfolded and try to identify forks by touch. One man nails 15 out of 17 and is offered a job as a dinner consultant. You both hate and respect him. Eventually, a new phrase enters the Roman vocabulary tying etiquette. Scrolls are written. Diagrams are drawn. One pamphlet includes a chart titled Ideal Prong Count by Food Texture. It's both fascinating and terrifying. At a formal dinner, you hear a guest explain. You could use a 3-tiner for figs, but the seeds require more lateral pressure. 4-prong dispersion is essential. No one argues. Everyone nods like this is normal. It's not, but it's Rome. And just when you think it's peaked, you meet someone with a fork with no tines at all. A smooth, flattened scoop with a pointed tip. You ask, isn't that a knife? He says it's a post fork. You excuse yourself, go home and stare into your utensil drawer for a long time. You pull out your old 2-pronged fork. Simple, elegant, a little bent. You use it to eat a plum. And it works perfectly. There are rumors swirling through the forum. Forks are no longer just eating tools. They've become dangerous. You hear it first from a baker's apprentice, breathless and flour-dusted, who swears he saw 2 patricians duel in the alley behind the Temple of Minerva using dining forks. Over a pear tart, he whispers dramatically, "Left one of them with a scar this long?" He holds out his arm way too wide. You laugh it off. Rome is full of ridiculous tales. But then the stories multiply. A merchant claims someone tried to rob him at fork point. A senator allegedly banned forks from his villa after a guest used one to defend himself against a wayward goose. And at a festival in the Aventine, you see a booth where children are fencing with oversized wooden forks. It's official, the fork has become a weapon. Not metaphorically, literally. You attend a dinner party, and before the first course even hits the table, a guest leans in and says, "You hear about the duel outside the bakery?" You nod. They say it wasn't just any fork. It was a 4-pronged slicer from Sicilia. Balanced, weighted. Could fillet a sardine at 20 paces. Everyone at the table murmurs appreciatively. You glance down at your own fork. Suddenly it feels inadequate. Historians still argue whether any actual deaths occurred due to dining fork violence, or whether these stories were the Roman equivalent of tabloid gossip. But the point remains, forks are now powerful. They carry social weight. They can wound reputations and fingers. You're invited to a rather tense diplomatic banquet. As you enter the atrium, you notice something odd. 2 guards standing watch beside a wooden box. Inside guests' forks. "We check utensils at the door now," the host explains with an apologetic shrug. Too many incidents. He says it casually, but you notice his left hand is bandaged. You attend the feast with a loaned spoon. It feels wrong. You try to stab a beet, and it slips rolling across the plate like a gladiator dodging spears. Your neighbor laughs, you laugh. But quietly, you miss your fork. Later that week, you hear of a new invention, the blunt fork. It's exactly what it sounds like. Rounded tines, no edge, decorative but harmless. They're marketed as polite and conversation-friendly. You see one at a garden party and nearly cry at how soft the world has become. Then again, some forks have always looked dangerous. There's one design sweeping through the upper class now, long tines curved slightly inward with barbs near the tips. Ostensibly for gripping meat, more likely for gripping attention. One noble brags that his fork was inspired by a scorpion's tail. You make a mental note not to sit near him ever again. But the theatrics don't stop there. You attend a dinner where the host stages a fork duel demonstration between 2 professionals. It's half swordplay, half interpretive dance. They parry and twirl clashing forks dramatically over a roast duck centerpiece. The crowd claps like they're at the Colosseum. One guest mutters it's only a matter of time before someone starts selling fork holsters. He's wrong. They're already selling them. You see your first one in a shop window in Trastevere, brown leather belt mounted, with space for 2 utensils. For the refined and ready, the sign reads, "You buy one." You're not proud. Historians still debate whether these displays of fork combat were taken seriously, or if they were simply Rome's latest obsession with performance. The same way they turned bathing into politics and bread into theater. Either way, you're now living in a city where a misplaced fork can cause a diplomatic crisis. You hear about a failed marriage proposal at a state banquet. The groom-to-be presented his intended with a jewel-encrusted fork, only to discover she's from a spoon-preferring household. Her father stormed out. The engagement was called off. You can't make this up. Then there's the opposite story, a street vendor and a seamstress who fall in love after bonding over their matching plain, 2-pronged forks. It's sweet, it's simple. You find yourself rooting for them like they're heroes in an epic. It's also absurd, but somehow kind of beautiful. Because even in the midst of chaos of escalating tines and sharpened edges, people are still finding meaning in this tiny pronged object. Still defining themselves by it. Still expressing love, power, rebellion, and grace through a flick of the wrist at dinner. You attend a small, quiet meal hosted by a retired soldier. No duels, no politics. Just 6 people, good bread, fresh olives, and the soft sound of forks on ceramic. You feel something strange. Peace. You glance around the table. No one is showing off. No one is posturing. They're just eating, laughing, living, and you think maybe it was never the fork that was dangerous. Maybe it was just us. It's a sunny afternoon in Rome, and you're walking through the Palatine district, minding your own business when you see it. In a shop window. A fork. Not just any fork, this one is dazzling, theatrical, ridiculous. It has 5 tines, yes, 5 each, spiraling outward like the rays of the sun. The handle is twisted bronze in the shape of a dolphin, leaping through a hoop of tiny rubies. At the base, a dangling charm shaped like a cluster of grapes sways gently every time someone passes by. You stare at it like it just insulted your ancestors. There's no way anyone eats with that. But, oh, they do. The shopkeeper emerges with a sales pitch so smooth, you briefly forget how much you hate everything about this thing. It's a centerpiece utensil, he explains. Meant to start conversations. Also works for skewering candied quail in awkward silence. You blink. He adds, we also have one shaped like a harp. You leave quickly, but you start noticing more of them novelty forks. There's a woman using one shaped like a fish, complete with enamel scales. A senator arrives at a public feast with a fork handle carved into the face of Neptune. One artist sculpts a fork where the tines spell the word feast when viewed from above. It's not enough to eat, now you have to perform. You go to a dinner where every course is paired with a matching mood fork. A fork shaped like lightning for the spicy bean course. A star-shaped fork for sweet cheeses. One that plays a musical chime when tapped against the plate. You accidentally start a sonata during the soup. Historians still argue whether this era of fork flamboyance was a reaction to previous rigidity or simply a byproduct of imperial indulgence. Either way, Rome is now in full utensil peacocking mode, and you're both horrified and fascinated. You attend a nobleman's banquet where forks are assigned personalities. Yours is the philosopher. 4 modest tines slightly bowed with a quote from Seneca, etched into the handle. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. You try to spear a prune and realize the tines are too soft. A guest next to you laughs and says, "Of course they are. It's contemplative." You're not sure if you're at a meal or a parody of one. Another party takes it even further. Guests are told to bring forks that express their inner essence. One woman brings a fork made entirely of glass. It shatters mid-salad. No one blinks. A man arrives with a fork fused to a candle, which drips wax onto everything he eats. Someone else wears their fork as a brooch and refuses to touch food at all. You start to feel like you're the last person who just wants to eat normally. Then comes the collector class, a new social category of Romans who don't just use forks, they curate them. You're invited to the home of one such collector. His walls are covered in mounted forks, each displayed like sacred relics. He walks you through them with reverence. This one found in the ruins of a villa in Sicilia pre-Caesar. Possibly ceremonial. This one used once by a visiting Nubian prince to spear a honeyed locust. And this, the silent fork. Never used, never touched, still sealed in wax. He turns to you, eyes glinting. Do you collect? You shake your head. I eat. He sighs disappointed. But this is the culture now. Forks aren't just for eating, they're for signaling. Wealth, taste, wit, even irony. At a literary feast, one playwright brings a fork with tines so long they curl back toward the handle. Completely unusable. Everyone laughs. He wins the evening. You eat cheese with your fingers and consider a new career. Historians still debate whether this burst of creativity was a symptom of a culture on the brink or a genuine celebration of artistry. You think it's both Rome trying to decorate its way through decline, but also discovering joy in the tiniest, silliest things. Because for all the extravagance, you see something oddly sweet in the madness. People designing forks like birds, animals, planets. Children carving wooden forks and painting them in bright colors. A poet selling handmade love forks on street corners, small heart-shaped things wrapped in red ribbon, meant to be given instead of flowers. One night, you sit under a grapevine pergola with a friend. She's brought two tiny forks each shaped like a crescent moon. You eat dates. No music, no pressure, no nonsense. It's quiet. She says they're a pair. I found them at a temple market. Thought they were charming. You nod. They are. She offers you one to keep. You accept. Not because it's useful. Not because it's fashionable. But because it's yours now. And that's the real secret, you realize. It was never about the forks. It was about the people behind them. The stories. The choices. The small, strange ways we try to express ourselves even at the dinner table. You're invited to a feast that promises an unforgettable journey through utensil evolution, which, if you're being honest, sounds exhausting. But you go anyway because the host is rich, influential, and once gave you a wine goblet shaped like a snail. You feel obligated. When you arrive, you're greeted by a butler dressed like a second-century kitchen slave, who solemnly hands you a scroll. It's a menu, yes, but also a timeline. Fork history laid out course by course. You blink. You're not even drunk yet. Course 1 is served with your hands, symbolic of pre-utensil life. Raw figs, almonds, a smear of goat cheese on a slab of flatbread. Everyone is awkward. A few guests nibble with exaggerated primitivism. One woman licks her fingers like a feral cat. You try not to make eye contact. Course 2 comes with a two-pronged fork, a replica of the original Byzantine design. The dish roasts duck slivers soaked in date syrup. It's sticky, messy, perfect. You feel a strange sense of nostalgia for a time you never lived in. Course 3 times. Course 4 times. Course 5, the inevitable 5. By dessert, you're holding a fork that looks less like a dining tool and more like a piece of military equipment. You can't actually eat with it. It just says you could do damage. The panna cotta flees from your tines like it's afraid. But you don't care anymore, because what you're seeing is something more than pomp. It's reverence. This ridiculous, performative, lavish dinner is also a tribute. A tribute to transformation. To how something so simple, a bit of carved metal, can change, evolve, adapt. And to how when we hold it in our hands, we change too. Historians still argue whether fork design in Rome truly followed such a linear progression, or whether this is just clever storytelling layered over chaos. Either way, you feel something genuine stir in your chest. And not just acid reflux. It's awe at what humans do when we care about the small things. At how we take objects and load them with meaning. How we dress them in gold, turn them into gifts. Symbols, weapons, jokes, art. A fork isn't just a fork anymore, it's a mirror. You begin to see them everywhere, in sculpture. A new statue in the Temple of Venus shows her reclining with a fork in her lap, gazing at it like it's a lost lover. In poetry, a senator's daughter writes a sonnet titled, "Upon This Sacred Tine." It's awful. You pretend to enjoy it. There's even a religious splinter group that believes the fork's 3 tines symbolize divine balance, body, mind, and appetite. You don't join, but you buy one of their little fork pendants because it looks cool. Artisans now compete to create the most absurd, whimsical designs. You attend a gallery opening called Tined Whimsy. One room is filled entirely with musical forks, each one tuned to a different note. Another has emotion forks, small pronged stubs made of various materials, wood for sadness, marble for joy, amber for longing. A philosopher stares at one made of ash for nearly an hour before whispering, "This is my soul." You're not sure if he's okay, but it doesn't stop there. A fashion trend explodes fork jewelry, earrings, necklaces. One woman wears a tiara made entirely of bent cutlery. You overhear someone say she was crowned at a fondue. You no longer question any of this. You're past that. You're attending weddings where couples exchange engraved forks instead of rings. For better or worse, one bride says tearfully, through soup and salad. The crowd cries. You even meet a man who claims to have trained his parrot to eat with a tiny golden fork. You think he's lying. You desperately hope he's not. And as you walk home from yet another decadent dinner, the moon rising over the rooftops of the Subura, you find yourself smiling. Because Rome is doing what Rome always does. It has taken something mundane and made it ridiculous. Made it sacred. Made it beautiful. The same city that once mocked forks as effeminate trinkets now celebrates them as cultural artifacts. The same people who laughed at your two-tiner now obsess over curvature and balance. And you quietly, steadily have been here through it all. Forks have followed you through gossip scandal, duels, fashion trends, and philosophical meltdowns. And now they rest quietly in the pockets and drawers of every Roman household, ready for the next fig, the next cheese cube, the next course of life. You arrive home. You hang your cloak. You reach into your satchel and pull out your latest fork, a modest 3-tine model made from brass with a tiny olive leaf carved into the handle. No gemstones, no inscriptions. Just quiet craftsmanship. You run your thumb over the tines, and for a moment, everything is still. Not because it's fancy, not because it's historical, but because you've carried it this far, and it's carried you. It's early evening now. The sky is softening, casting that golden orange haze across the rooftops of Rome, and you're heading to yet another dinner. But this one's different. It's not hosted by a senator or an artist or a fashionably unhinged fork collector. It's hosted by tradespeople who move between provinces, who speak in half a dozen dialects, who wear dust-stained cloaks and always seem to be in motion. Tonight, they're settling down. You've been invited because you helped one of them fix a wheel last week. It was a good deed. You didn't expect a feast in return. And yet here you are, ducking into a stone courtyard as lamps are being lit, and olives sizzle over a small brazier. There's music, laughter, and the clatter of plates being set. But what grabs your attention immediately is that everyone at the long table is holding a fork. Not identical forks, mismatched ones. Some 2-pronged. Some 3. Some rough iron. Some polished bronze. One man is using a fork made of carved bone. Another's is bamboo, clearly from far to the east. One guest, clearly proud, brandishes a tiny gold fork no longer than your pinky. Nabatean, he grins. Found it in a caravan trunk. You sit, you take it in. The forks at this table aren't about social posturing. They're stories, memories. They've crossed deserts, seas, mountains. They've speared dates in Damascus, pulled meat off skewers in Alexandria, pinched fish cakes in the ports of Massilia. Each one carries a journey in its scratches and tarnish. Historians still argue whether traders played a major role in spreading the fork throughout Europe, or if its rise was primarily driven by aristocratic circles. But sitting here, you know the truth both. Because the traders are the bridges between worlds. They bring silk and spices, but also habits, tools, rituals. They carry things not just in wagons, but in how they eat. And they share. Tonight's meal is modest. Grilled lamb barley cakes, a sauce made from citrus and herbs you don't recognize. But it's one of the best you've had. Simple. Earthy, no artifice, no competition. A trader next to you nods at your fork. Roman, he asks. You nod. Brass. Local. He smiles. Strong, reliable, honest. Then he shows you his a flat-tined fork with a curved tip. Anatolia, he says. Used for roasted roots. Terrible for grapes. You both laugh. And for a moment the fork feels human again. Not sacred, not absurd. Just a tool. Useful. Personal. Shared. You look around and realize every person at the table holds their fork differently. Some grip near the base, others delicately pinch the end. Some use both hands. Some scoop with it like a spoon. No one judges. It's a conversation, not a ceremony. You help yourself to more lamb. The trader across from you dips his fork into a shared bowl of honeyed carrots. Another guest carves a slice of cheese and passes it still speared across the table. It's communal, cooperative. Something you haven't seen in the marble halls of senatorial mansions in a long time. No one checks tines. No one debates curvature. No one's fork is locked in a velvet case. You sit back chewing slowly and realize something. The fork has left Rome. Not geographically, culturally. It's no longer tethered to formality, to elite circles, to sparkling shows of status. It's out in the world now, in wagons, in market stalls, in leather satchels and grain sacks. It's being used by people who don't care about fashion or doctrine or etiquette guides. They care that it works, and that makes it powerful. You glance down at your fork again. You've had it for a while now. It's starting to show wear small nicks, a tiny bend near the middle tine. You used to polish it every night. Lately you don't bother. And strangely it looks better this way. You realize that the next phase of the fork's journey has nothing to do with Rome's opinion of it. Rome can scoff, sculpt, or sanctify, but the real future of the fork lies in the hands of travelers, farmers, cooks, innkeepers, people who eat, not perform. Historians may continue to debate where the fork originated or which class truly adopted it first. But you're seeing its future unfold in cracked bowls, shared dishes, and dusty hands. A woman beside you gently carves a boiled fig and shares half with the guest next to her. No words, just a smile and a fork extended across the table. And you suddenly understand the fork was never about elegance. It was about connection. You're back in Rome, but it doesn't feel like home the way it used to. The streets are the same, cobbled, chaotic, loud, with gossip and pigeons. The taverns still smell like spilt wine and ambition. Senators still argue about nothing in the forum, but something's different. You walk past a food stall and see forks, actual Roman forks, lined up for sale like loaves of bread. Cheap, utilitarian, no jewels, no inscriptions. Just forks. A woman buys two and tosses them into her basket beside lentils and cabbage. She doesn't even look at them. You watch as a child eats street food with a tiny iron fork. He stabs a fig chews, wipes his mouth on his sleeve, and runs off. No ceremony, no meaning, no identity crisis. Just eating. You smile. You make your way home weaving through markets and colonnades until you reach your kitchen. You open your drawer? There they are, your collection. Dozens of forks from over the years. Two-pronged. Three-pronged, absurd five-tiners curved like question marks, straight like spears, wide, narrow, short, long. One even shaped like a crescent moon. You pick up your oldest fork, the one with the bent tine and the brass handle that never quite fit your grip. You remember the first time you used it. The stares, the arguments, the pride. And now no one cares. Because everyone has one. It's in every household, every inn, every market. You even hear rumors that someone's trying to make folding travel forks, compact, portable, tuckable next to your wax tablets and emergency olives. Someone else is making one that unscrews into a spoon. Madness. But it's not the kind of fork that matters anymore. It's that the fork has become normal. The arc is complete. You visit a local school to drop off a message for a friend and see students eating lunch with, of course, forks. One girl tries to twirl her noodles and ends up launching a meatball onto the teacher's robe. Chaos. Hilarious. No one says, "How dare you use a fork?" They just laugh. Historians still argue whether this universal adoption happened fast or slow, but you realize that for those living through it, it didn't feel like a wave. It felt like a trickle. Small changes, small shifts. And then one day, you're surrounded by prongs and you don't remember how it was before. The fork didn't arrive in glory, it snuck in with the soup. Rome absorbed it like it always does. What was once foreign is now mundane. What was once controversial is now standard. The empire didn't just conquer lands, it conquered ideas. It made them Roman and then forgot they were ever anything else. You wonder what's next. You hear murmurs of new eating tools from the east, something with tiny sticks. You can't imagine it'll catch on. Too fiddly. Too delicate. Too much effort. Then again, you once thought forks were ridiculous. You meet a group of visiting traders later that week, and during your shared meal, you notice one of them using a fork to stir tea. Another is carving bread with the side of a particularly sharp tine. A third has his fork strung on a leather loop around his neck like a talisman. It's grown beyond even you now. The fork has become cultural luggage carried, adapted, repurposed. You recall a phrase once murmured at a banquet years ago. This isn't just cutlery, it's conquest. It was a joke, sort of, but also not. Because this little object, lightweight, simple, sharp, changed how people ate. And that changes everything. It changed who got invited to what, who got judged, who felt clean, who felt foreign, who learned to hold it, and who dared to twist its form into something new. It changed Rome. Not in one sweep, but in the 1,000 quiet ways daily life evolves. Like moss growing between marble cracks. You head to your favorite tavern that night. The wine's as bitter as ever, the stew slightly too salty. You sit at the corner table, the one you've claimed through sheer consistency. The server drops a bowl in front of you, raises an eyebrow, and asks the same thing he's asked for years. Fork or fingers? You grin. Fork. He nods and tosses you one. A plain one. Wooden handle, iron tines. Perfect. You eat quietly. Around you the city hums. A boy recites Virgil from a stool. A dog barks at a rat near the fire pit. Someone breaks into song on the street. Someone else yells about taxes. And in every hand at every table in the lap of every tired, hungry Roman, a fork used without thought, without fear, without fanfare, just as it was always meant to be. You wake up one morning to the sound of birdsong and distant shouting. Probably a baker arguing with a goat again. Rome sounds the same as ever, but today feels different. Because tonight you've been invited to a Last Supper. Not the Last Supper, just a symbolic one. A reenactment of what some scholars are calling the final imperial convivium, a feast modeled on the last days of old Roman extravagance. One last hurrah before the curtain falls. You dress simply. No gilded toga, no jeweled sandals. Just you a linen belt and the same brass fork you've carried for years. The dinner is held in a crumbling villa overlooking the Tiber. Ivy climbs the walls. Statues of forgotten gods lean at odd angles in the garden. Inside, the triclinium glows with torchlight and memory. You recline alongside philosophers, artisans, scribes, and a few former senators pretending not to notice their wealth has vanished. No one's here to impress anyone. No duels. No harp-shaped forks. Just a long table, too many courses, and a quiet sense that you're eating more than food. You're eating history. The courses arrive. Olives bread, honeyed quail lentils, cheeses dusted with herbs wine poured from cracked amphorae. Nothing fancy, nothing loud, but every dish feels earned, familiar, final. And what do you eat it all with? Your fork, not the gaudy kind, not an heirloom, not a fashion piece. Just a tool, balanced, scarred, loved. You glance around the room. Everyone has one, even the oldest guests. Even the priest who once called forks the devil's pincers now eats his stew with a three-pronged model and doesn't flinch. You raise an eyebrow at him. He shrugs and says, "Turns out the devil likes lentils." You laugh, so does he. You think back over everything. The whispers, the scandals, the mockery, the rules, the revolutions, the duels, the parades, the obsessions. The people who tried to define the fork own it, fight it. And the people who just used it to eat in peace. Historians still argue whether the fall of Rome was political, economic, spiritual, or inevitable. But sitting here, you realize the end of empire doesn't look like fire and collapse. It looks like a room full of people quietly eating dinner. Together. No emblems, no edicts, no speeches. Just the clink of metal on clay and the slow unraveling of something beautiful, absurd, and very, very human. The last course is served. Dates stuffed with nuts dipped in honey sprinkled with crushed mint. You spear one gently with your fork. The tines have dulled over time. They don't pierce as cleanly as they used to. But they still do the job. You chew slowly. Someone proposes a toast not to Rome, but to the table. To those who gathered, who shared, who dared to eat with grace in a graceless time. You raise your goblet. The wine tastes like vinegar. No one complains. And when the feast ends, no one lingers. No one proclaims it historic. There are no statues, no scribes, just people rising quietly, wiping crumbs from their sleeves, and stepping into the Roman night. You stay behind. Just a moment. You look at your fork, and you say thank you. Not aloud, not for anyone else. Just for you. For how far it came. For how far you came with it. And then slowly, gently, you tuck it into your satchel, right where it's always belonged. Not as a weapon, not as a trophy, but as a piece of something ordinary and extraordinary. Wind down 300 words. Now, as you drift away from Rome and its candlelit tables, let the clatter of forks fade into the soft murmur of memory. Picture the torches dimming the chatter, softening into gentle laughter, the last of the wine settling in its jug. The empire winds down, but your breath remains steady. The warm night air carries the scent of roasted garlic and old stone. Somewhere in the distance, a lyre plays slowly, its notes tumbling like breadcrumbs across the patio. You can almost hear it, the quiet music of people sharing food stories and little silver tools that once caused an empire to raise its eyebrows. Let yourself recline once more on that worn banquet cushion cool fabric beneath your arm. The weight of the fork so small rests in your hand, not as a relic, but as a reminder. A symbol not of power, but of persistence. Not of extravagance, but of daily life gently moving forward. Forks came and went in style and scandal and golden rust, but in the end, they simply stayed. Like you. So take a slow, deep breath now. Let your body soften. Your shoulders drop. Your fingers unclench. You've made it through the history of a thing so small, so strange, and so utterly human. You'll never look at it the same way again. Close your eyes. Let the banquet dissolve. Let the empire fall away. You're not in Rome anymore. You're in a quiet room under soft light with your own rhythm of rest returning to you. The story is over. You've made it. Sleep well. End of script. Sweet dreams.